Claude 3.7 Sonnet, Anthropic's newest LLM, is out, and it's absolutely worth knowing about. What is it and why should you care? Let's break through the hype. Anthropic is calling Claude 3.7 a hybrid reasoning model. Traditionally, with reasoning models like DeepSeek R1 or O1, those have been separate models. So for example, if you want a more traditional LLM, you might use GPT-4o, and if you want a reasoning LLM, you would use O1. As a reminder, reasoning models basically spend more time thinking. So when you ask a reasoning model something, typically they'll tell you how they're actually thinking through the problem, and then they'll give you an answer. So Claude 3.7 Sonnet basically combines these two abilities, the traditional LLM and the reasoning model, into the same model. And that, in my opinion, is definitely a better user experience. However, it's important to note that in order to use those reasoning capabilities, you still have to click this button to turn on extended thinking mode. So for the user, you're kind of still selecting which model you're using or which behavior you're choosing. However, I think this indicates where Claude eventually wants to go with more of a unified model. In fact, OpenAI has actually said that they're going to do something similar, where rather than releasing O3, which would have been the next reasoning model they were going to release, they're just going to release a unified model instead. There were a couple other announcements in this release that I thought were kind of interesting. Claude Code is specifically a coding agent that lives directly in your terminal, which is a really smart way to kind of embed into a developer's typical coding process. And it can do things like update features or refactor code. This is currently just in research preview. There's also an API for Claude 3.7 Sonnet that you can use, and you can specify how long you want the model to think. If you really want to go deep, Anthropic did release a longer blog post talking about their extended thinking capabilities. Two things that stuck out to me when reading this blog post was, one, this idea of faithfulness in the thinking process. Essentially, even though Claude tells you its reasoning process, it's still TBD on how faithfully that actually represents what Claude is actually thinking. Kind of disturbingly human, isn't it? Also, Claude 3.7 is better at agentic tasks because it can spend more time on thinking and solve open-ended problems better. A fun example is they actually had Claude play Pokemon, and you can see how Claude 3.7 gets a lot further in the Pokemon game than even Claude 3.5. But my biggest takeaway, and perhaps this is a bias because I'm a product person, is that throughout this release, there's definitely more positioning on using LLMs to solve real-world use cases. In fact, Anthropic actually mentions this in the blog post. In developing our reasoning models, we've optimized somewhat less for math and computer science competition problems, and instead shifted focus towards real-world tasks that better reflect how businesses actually use LLM. You can see this throughout the blog post, particularly in this paragraph where they literally call out a bunch of different companies, including Cursor, Cognition, and Replit, who are using Claude effectively. This certainly wasn't the most groundbreaking release I've seen from Anthropic, but I think there's some really great nuggets and definitely signals where Anthropic wants to go in 2025. I'm Diana, and I break down tech startups and AI without the hype. Follow for more.